You here for an incredibly important and timely discussion, which is how to combat high drug prices that are burdening American families and our healthcare system. If you've been watching the news, you know how timely this discussion is. From Mylan to Turing, drug companies have made headlines by putting profits above patients and squeezing American consumers. In 2014, national prescription drug prices increased by 12.2%. That is the fastest growing element of the healthcare system and is contributing to higher premiums, higher out-of-pocket costs. The spike is driving up really the entire rate of healthcare growth, and it's making drugs unaffordable for the patients who need them most. With about half of all Americans and 90% of seniors taking prescription drugs in any given month, this growing crisis is unsustainable. This is not an issue that just affects a few Americans. It affects all Americans, and strong majorities of voters in both parties support common sense reform to make prescription drugs more affordable. In the last few months, we've seen some progress, particularly in the administration. The Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovations recently announced a new mandatory model at the Innovation Center to reform how Medicare pays for drugs under its Part B benefit. We were particularly excited about this innovation at CMMI because it models something that CAP developed last year, really trying to change the incentives for doctors and push back on some of the sky-high prices from drug companies. But we still have a lot of work to do. We need to pay for value, and today, CAP is building on last November's report with a new framework for value-based drug pricing. Of course, really no one has been a stronger advocate for consumers in this fight on drug prices than Senator Amy Klobuchar. As a strong progressive and a powerful voice for middle-class families, Senator Klobuchar has set aside some petty partisanship and worked tirelessly to pass bipartisan prescription drug reform. She's reached across the aisle on numerous occasions and has seen real progress on this issue. But this is not just an issue. It's really personal for her. Like so many parents, Senator Klobuchar has a daughter who needs to carry an EpiPen at all times. She knows the challenges so many families are facing, and she won't give up until we've changed the way our system works. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Well, thank you so much, Neera, and thank you for your leadership. And it sort of, I kind of noticed that we're doing this the same day as the presidential debate. And so, my hope is that someone will ask a question about drug prices in one of these debates, because it is the number one thing that I have heard about from our constituents, and for really a good reason. I'll just give you a sense of this. This is just in one office in 1 month how many cards we received at our state fair booth where people wrote in about prescription drug problems. They come up to our booth, which is nicely located next to the Pork Chop on a Stick and Bob's Snake Zoo and the Haunted House, not where you want to be as a politician, but they're my neighbors. And so this is just one section of what people wrote in. And then in the office, the emails that we received, just to give you a sense of that. That's just sense. And anyone's welcome to come. You probably shouldn't put their names in any story, but you could look at the emails if you want, just to give you a sense of what we're dealing with and the kind of stories that we are hearing every single day. The first one that I picked up today was about a family who had just had a similar experience of mine. Their daughter had just literally touched a cashew, hadn't eaten it, put it near her mouth, and found out they were in the middle of the woods, just like we were on vacation, and found out that her daughter was allergic to cashews and took this crazy drive through the woods to an emergency room, as we did, not knowing every mile what was going to happen, and then ended up finding out for the rest of our lives that we would be on this journey of allergies with the EpiPen at our side every single day. And you have other stories that we've received because of this. Dwyer family from Cambridge, Minnesota, daughter diagnosed with a rare form of leukemia, Aaron stage 3 leukemia, the older brother. The family faced astronomical out-of-pocket expenses during the treatment. Average wholesale price in the U.S. of the drug, $367 per day, which is double the average in other countries. Family wrote in from Elk River, Minnesota. This was an EpiPen issue. They get a bunch of EpiPens, 2 for home, 1 for school, 1 for daycare. This year they paid $533 for each 2-pack, even after using the coupon. Family in Lakeville, Minnesota. Daughter was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. She needs insulin on a daily basis. This means paying $108 a month for the fast-acting form of insulin when we know it costs a lot less than that. So that is what we're dealing with in the real world, and why I have taken on this issue for years, but am taking it on even with a newfound vigor in the last year, and I can tell you why. And CAP has put a lot of this in their report, which I suggest you read, not only the one that's coming out today on the negotiation issue, but also the past report, which I thought did a really nice job, kind of prescription drugs for dummies. I meant that in pause, like those books, in that it explains this complex system and why this is so hard to get at the costs and what's going on. So here's what we know is happening lately. The prices for 4 of the nation's top 10 drugs have increased more than 100% since 2011. So yes, we're talking about EpiPen. I'll use it as an example a few times. Yes, that's what the hearing was about. But let's be honest here. This is not just one drug where this happened. 4 of the top 10 drugs, prices have increased 100% since 2011 in America. Sales for those 10 drugs were up 44% between 2011 and 2014, even though they were prescribed 22% less. Prescription drugs increased by more than 12%, the spending, in 2014. Think of that, 12% increase. In 2013, there was only a 2.4% increase. In 2013, profit margins among the top 10 drug makers, this is in the CAP report, ranged from 10% to 43%, way above where the average is for profits of other corporations. Today, prescription drugs comprise an estimated 17% of total health care costs in the country, and prescription drug coverage is 19% of employer-based health insurance plans. So EpiPen, let's just start with there. The recent outrage surrounding the huge price increase on EpiPen is just the latest in a long list. Mylan has had a virtual monopoly on EpiPen, one that pretty much landed in its lap due to one product being taken off the market, one not approved, and assuming that most consumers would find a way to cover the cost of the medication, Mylan went for it, used that virtual monopoly, raised prices by nearly 500% since 2007. And with a convenient misclassification through the Medicaid drug rebate program, Mylan paid much smaller rebates to states and the federal government for the drug, raking in even more profits at taxpayers' expense. As a member of Congress, we write these letters all the time to say, well, yeah. And I will say that we were pretty shocked on a Friday evening to find out that in my state alone, that it's going to be $4 million in 1 year that the government has basically overpaid Mylan. So let's look at some of the other drugs. The price of insulin has tripled in the last decade. The price of the infectious disease drug Daraprim increased 5,000% overnight. The antibiotic doxycycline, pretty famous drug, been around forever, went from $20 a bottle to nearly $2,000 a bottle in 6 months. So if you wonder why I'm getting all those emails and all those cards, there you have it. And I think we've all seen this before, especially people in this room that may have dealt with this on any side, whether it is as reporters, whether it is as staff, whether it is as representing some of these companies. Parents, patients, and politicians, tired of exorbitant increases for a prescription drug, take to social media and they do press releases voicing their concerns. The press catches wind, hearings and investigations are called for, Letters are written, legislative ideas are floated, new discoveries break, more outrage, petitions, TV news segments interviewing experts. The pharmaceutical company in question brings on a public relations firm. Maybe someone gets fired. Maybe there's an apology. Some nominal changes are made, but profits are protected and profit margins keep inching ahead. That's what's happened over and over and over again. Eventually, things go quiet until the next tweet goes out from Bernie Sanders or Neera Tanden. Maybe you don't have quite the following, but it's close. And then it's another drug, and it starts all over again. So we need to put a stop to this cycle. We need to take on the price gouging that is more than unseemly, but not always illegal, and quickly becoming a hallmark of the pharmaceutical industry. How? Well, in a perfect world, competition is the best way to ensure that prescription drugs are affordable. But when the marketplace is so screwed up that it systematically looks for ways to reduce and eliminate competition, then we have to step back to figure out how to fix it. In a typical market, a consumer reviews the choices, compares quality and price, makes a choice, and pays for the product. Compare that to prescription drugs. A person making a purchasing decision, the patient who takes a medication, the doctor who prescribes the medication, the insurer who determines the insurance plan's benefit structure, and the pharmacies that fill the prescription all affect the choice and the cost of the drug. The government has a role both on the buying side through Medicare, Medicaid, the VA, and numerous other programs, and on the supply side with the FDA, which decides which products are going to approve. The experts explain this dynamic leads to information asymmetries and agency problems, but I think the best way to say it is that there are many cooks in the kitchen at the same time. Patients with insurance and doctors often do not know the costs. On the flip side, insurers have incentives to ignore individual patient issues in exchange for deeper discounts. At each step, either because one party in the chain lacks information or has different incentives, there is an opportunity for competition to break down, further tilting the scale toward profit and away from consumers. On the seller's side, a similar challenge. The FDA must approve drugs only if they are safe and effective. That's good. With the exception of generics, a pharmacy must fill the prescription as written. That means branded companies focus on what doctors prescribe and less on their comparative prices. As a result, there is minimal price competition between branded drugs that treat the same condition and tremendous price competition among generics. According to the FTC, a branded company loses 90% of its sales within a year of generic entry, and on average, the generic price is 85% lower than the branded price. This dynamic explains why generics are so important in controlling price. So here's some solutions when we know we have a major problem that get at this idea of competition, but also how we can try to push that competition so it's actually occurring. The competitive dynamic in the pharmaceutical industry is unique. There are few, if any at all, where a single class of competitor has such a powerful and unique impact on competition. This means there are incredible incentives for competitors to delay competition and share the profits, or for the branded company to simply exclude competitors. The incentives are so strong that it's common for branded pharmaceuticals to pay their potential generic competitors to stay off the market as part of a patent suit. That, is, those of you who have been around a while know, is called pay for delay. Here's an example. The FTC alleged in one case that a company settled patent litigation regarding generic versions of Profidil, a wakefulness drug. The company paid 4 generics over $200 million to stay out of the market for 6 years. The CEO explained that as a result of the settlements, quote, "We were able to get 6 more years of patent protection. That's $4 billion in sales that no one expected." $4 billion. Here's the impact. Karen Winkler was forced to pay $500 a month out of pocket for that drug to treat her multiple sclerosis. Now that a generic version of it is on the market, she can get a 3-month supply with a $16 copay. Other times, instead of colluding with the generic company, the branded company manipulates regulations to delay generic entry. For a generic company to receive approval from the FDA, it must establish that its product is the same as the branded product. The test requires the generic company to obtain samples of the branded drug. That is our whole way that we do generic competition in this country. So some branded companies have gone to great lengths to prevent those generic samples from getting in the hands of the generic companies. So two bills that we're doing here. One, the first problem, the pay for delay, is the bill I have with Senator Grassley, and the CBO has come in at $3 billion it would save for taxpayers, and I literally would challenge my colleagues to vote against that bill if only we would have a vote. And the second is the CREATES Act, which is a bill with Senator Leahy, Grassley, Lee, and myself that would push to have those samples out there so that you can better develop generic drugs. Both those bills, if I had to bet on these bills, have broad support compared to some of the other bills that might do more, but are a little more hard to get passed, but have to happen. Secondly, so the first thing is to get these generics into the market in a better way. The second is to enforce the laws that protect competition. That's antitrust enforcement and all other kinds of enforcement. An example, Allergan tried to force patients taking Namenda, a drug used to treat Alzheimer's, to switch to a new version of the drug before the generic version of Namenda was available. This strategy is referred to as product hopping. Instead of suing after the fact, the New York Attorney General, using the antitrust laws, obtained a court order to block the plan until after generic competition was available. That's a creative and effective use of the antitrust laws. Just last week, 35 attorney generals, including my own, challenged similar conduct, though this time it had already occurred, regarding the conduct of the manufacturer of Suboxone, a drug that treats opioid withdrawal symptoms. The FTC has spent significant resources on pay-for-delay patent settlements and deserves credit for its victory in that Supreme Court case, which has solved part of the problem, FTC versus activists. But I think there's still more that the FTC can be doing to enforce these antitrust laws. And then the last thing I'd mention for enforcement is what I mentioned earlier, and that is this misclassification issue. I think it's the elephant in the room when it comes to the government being owed money. EpiPen misclassification for years and years. It's treating EpiPen, as we all know, as a branded drug, right? Because then they introduced, remember, after the fact, they introduced the generic. But while they were introducing it as a branded drug, at the same time, Mylan classified EpiPen as a non-innovator multiple source drug or generic drug, and how it charged Medicaid and probably other government programs. And we know that because when we asked that question, that's what we found out. And and we have learned that CMS has said that it was wrongly classified. Well, how many other drugs are wrongly classified? If for Minnesota alone, it means $4 million in 1 year. And that is what our Department of Health and Human Services has estimated. We're awaiting news from CMS about how many other drugs have been wrongly classified and how much money this means to taxpayers. Third way we can help here, and that's eliminate barriers that constrain consumer choice and bargaining power. This gets to what the report is on today about negotiation under Medicare Part D. It's a bad deal for our seniors that they can't negotiate. As we know, the VA negotiates. Look at this, EpiPen. The VA pays approximately $183 for EpiPen 2-pack. In 2014, Medicare Part D, and this again, why do we have 2014? Because we can't get the current prices from CMS. We got this from a Kaiser report. In 2014, Medicare Part D paid approximately $344 for the 2-pack compared to the VA. So obviously this is a big deal, and I'm sure Neera can explain the complex plan suggested today involving arbitration and other things, but ideas in which we could harness the bargaining power of America's 39 million seniors that anyone in politics knows you don't mess with 39 million seniors and allow them to use that bargaining power to negotiate. Part of this, of course, is transparency. We're not going to be able to negotiate prices if we don't know what the value is and what those prices are. And a lot of times we hear, well, we can't have that transparency and everything's because of research and development. Well, the recent CAP report showed that 9 out of 10 pharmaceutical companies spend more on marketing than they do on R&D. And what we get on R&D are aggregate numbers, and so it's hard to break it down for each drug to try to figure out value. That was the reason given by Mylan for the increase in major part was this R&D, and yet as we know, the changes have been relatively minor to the drug, and why would that be worth a 500% increase, which is more than the original cost of the drug or the price on the drug. Then the last thing I would mention is just going back to the competition thing. In addition to these things that we have more using existing features, are almost enforcing competition by making sure they're giving the samples and they're not doing the patent settlements and keeping competition out. Another way is to promote in some new ways some increased competition. We have the fact that the FDA, there's been a backlog on generics. They've been making some improvements. It reached its height in 2012 with 2,866 backlogged applications. They now have a 10-month goal. Obviously, that's one thing. I don't view that as the cure-all, as some of my colleagues do in Congress, but it is one thing. Competition from outside of our own country. Senator McCain and I have the bill to allow the importation of drugs from Canada. Canada's paying basically 50% of what we're paying in American on average for the drugs. Minnesota, this is a huge issue because, as I've said many times, we can see Canada from our porch. So we just look across there and they're paying their drugs half the price. So we've had things like when Mark Dayton was senator, he actually, on his own personal dime, financed buses to go up there of seniors to buy drugs. Of course, then I came in, and the seniors asked me if I had the money to pay for a bus, which I don't. But that happened. Governor Pawlenty, Republican, ran for president, was supporter of getting the drugs from Canada. So we've had a lot of bipartisan support in our state for this. Senator Collins is on this bill, as well as Maine tried to do it just with their own state, and wasn't able to get that done. So this would, I think, create some much-needed competition. You could also do it as a trigger when drug prices go up to a certain extent. The HHS secretary or some other agency could make that decision, or the FDA, that it was time to trigger the reimportation, or that it was time to trigger some kind of a fee if the prices went up, that for which there was no basis under the law, or you could do it so that there would be a rebate that was paid. So there are all kinds of things you could do, but that is what I'm getting to the point, because just doing some of these things will help, like pay for delay. I just don't think it's going to, across the board, solve all these problems unless we do more. So I'll end with this. 1 out of 4 Americans whose prescription drug costs went up said they were unable to pay their medical bills. 1 out of 5 were forced to skip doses of their medication. 1 out of 14 people missed a mortgage payment due to rising prescription drug costs. This is not right, and our country can do better. So thank you, Neera. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Here. Thank you so much for those remarks. I wanted to kind of start off where you ended, which is essentially when you look at the market in the United States, it's a little bit, you can kind of understand why people are so upset, because the U.S. is an outlier from other countries, right? We both invest a lot of money in drug research as a country, so taxpayers pay for that investment through the NIH and other areas. And then we pay some of the highest drug prices because other countries essentially have single-payer systems or other ways in which they can use their market power to negotiate lower prices. So the American consumer is really hit at two levels for high drug prices. There's a range of ideas you've put forward, and I really appreciate the multifaceted approach of looking at drug prices writ large and then particular issues. But what do you think of that anomaly, and what does it mean for the approach we should be taking over the long term?
Well, I think, first of all, it should give us, if we're looking for any hope in this mess, that other countries have somehow been able to figure this out. So I start with trying to be the optimist. I have Hubert Humphrey's seat, and he was always the happy warrior, so I'll start with that. Okay. Number two, I think that the one thing that I didn't raise that I think is worth looking at is this investment the American people have made. There's a provision in the Bayh-Dole bill from way back that talks about, it's called marching rights, that you should be able to recoup the government and taxpayers some of their investment in this research. It has not really been tried in any big way. Some people are trying to do it. I think that's one interesting approach I didn't mention when you look at the fact that we're investing. But I think the third piece of the answer just gets to all these proposals I put out there, that if in fact people in other countries are getting the benefits of safe drugs, then we should be reaping those benefits. And there are many ways to do it, but certainly giving our people access to those less expensive drugs in other countries, of which there is some bipartisan support, would be one answer. And maybe even the threat of those drugs coming in would be enough if you had a trigger that they were going to come in if you raised the price to a certain amount. I mean, I was telling you I did the drug shortage bill with Susan Collins, and that was just kind of going nowhere. It was just sitting there. It was about the fact that I have very active doctors, nurses, and hospitals in Minnesota, and they kept coming to me about those drug shortages. So Susan and I put together a bill that basically would trigger the allowance, making it easier for the secretary to get drugs from other countries if there was a shortage. And that bill was stuck because pharma was against it. And then Dr. John LaPook of CBS, who is a correspondent, started asking questions at everyone's press conferences about it. And the next thing you know, not only did he win an Emmy for it, we passed the bill. So
great.
To all those
That's
reporters
great.
out there, you could win an Emmy if you take one of the, no. The point
Or,
is that
change the
shedding
country.
light on this, to me, the horror of this, not just here at CAP, but as we move forward in the presidential debates, in Senate debates, is what's most important. Because for too long, this is like a crisis that's getting worse and worse, and no one is doing anything about it because it's so easy not to do anything about it.
Let's start with the issue that's really captured so much attention, the EpiPen issue. After congressional attention and public outcry surrounding EpiPens, Mylan announced that it will increase the coupon from $100 to $300, which expands its patient assistance program, and will bring a generic version to the marketplace. So you really raise this issue, which is that there's a public outcry and then something happens at the margins. Do you think what they're doing is enough? And then how do we, and if it's not enough, how do you capture this attention to stay at the problem past the headlines?
When you look at it, I mean, you go back even to 08, 09, when it was something like $100. I mean, it has gone up so much that even with the coupon, you're still $200 more than it was. So no, I don't think that it's good enough. And then they introduced their own generic, and which, by the way, for regular people looking at this, it just shows what a mess this is in terms of transparency. So I don't think that fixes it. And I think it helps, as I've said repeatedly. It helped people. They're using those coupons when they get it. But you still have a situation where we don't know what this is meaning in the insurance market, how much they're paying, how those coupons work. It doesn't really go through to the exact price of it because some of the consumers are getting the benefits of those, but then how are they used? We can't even get really the Medicare rates. We know the VA rate is 183, which is very consistent. I found that interesting. That is what people sent me screenshots from other countries. I have screenshots from Australia and from Great Britain. I did a radio interview in Great Britain, and that was very interesting when I heard the 83 with the VA, because that is almost identical to what those prices were in those other countries. So it still isn't bringing it even down to that price when you have a $500-600 one with a 300 coupon. It may be in the neighborhood, but a lot of people were paying supposedly $600. So I think it's not enough, and certainly just talking about one drug isn't enough.
Just to stay on this particular issue of prices, I think the thing that people don't really understand is how a drug starts at a certain price, and then it's been on the market for a really long time, and then the price goes up dramatically. I mean, it's usually...
The doxycycline was a great example that I just used of that.
I mean, that's usually our experience with any product, is that it goes down as it's on the market longer because it includes more and more competition.
Unless some ingredient is suddenly at a shortage, like
Yes.
people would get that, like, oh, there's been a drought, and so you don't have this thing that you can use for a certain kind of food, and so the prices are up this year. People get that.
Yeah.
But that's not what this is.
But that's not happening across drugs from across the system. It does seem like, and essentially the argument is, we can charge that price, so we are charging that price.
Right.
And I totally understand that there are particular issues here and there, but how do we transform the market over the long term so that there's less power in each of the drug companies to just basically exact that price?
Right, and I think one of the things that they do when the price starts going up and how they justify it is they make minor changes to a product. One example that I think is in one of your reports, they change it from a tablet to a capsule size of the drug, and then they maybe do it as a time release. And each time then they get to extend their patent. It's called evergreening, right?
Yeah.
Because you make that patent evergreen, it's ever valid. And so, maybe there are ways, and there have been some instance of this where the antitrust laws can be used to say that's not right. That's how you're keeping this drug high. And I think that the other piece of this is just, again, how the market works. If you had real competition for that product and that kind of increase that you'd start to see where it was at $10, $50, $100, and suddenly it starts creeping up. You can't just have it be like I was thinking the cap proposal, which is looking at the prices at the beginning, but also looking at the prices as you go on year after year, because that's what's been happening. They keep increasing the prices.
So surveys show that roughly 2/3 of Americans, including majorities in both parties, are supporting action to address prescription drug prices and make them more affordable. You've been working on a variety of targeted responses and have done great work across the aisle with Senator Grassley and Senator Lee and a range of Republican senators alongside Senator Leahy. What are the other areas, or what are the broad areas we should know about that we could really pressure? There should be more public attention to get bipartisan support.
Well, I mean, if you want to do something immediately, I think that these bills that could have the best chance of passing right away and at least start to put a dent in things, but again, I don't think they will solve everything, are the pay for delay, which brings in $3 billion, stopping that practice, brings in $3 billion for the government over a number of years, and then probably the same for taxpayers because of what they're paying.
Yeah.
And that's the bill that Grassley and I have. And it has in the past passed through the Judiciary Committee. I don't think it did this year, but it shows that it had some support. It actually passed through. And so the idea there would be to get it as part of another bill. You could get it as part of the PDUFA, which is I love all these names.
I know. It's part of
which
the
is
conspiracy to keep us uninformed.
Right. And that deals with the FDA and putting some resources into moving drug approvals ahead. There is the Cures Act that's coming up, which has a lot of things in there that the pharmaceutical industry wants. There is a number of other opportunities with tax reform and other things, but what's been really frustrating is we need more than 3 or 4 people that are pushing to have a vote. So I think what we need is a trigger moment where this thing comes and the public is focused on the fact that we need to have a vote and we need to hold people accountable for their votes on this. Otherwise, it just becomes a plaything for industry. So, and we're not able to actually have the public's views known on any of these. So I would say those are some vehicles, as well as having a package on farmer prices. ACA reforms, the fact that we've seen these big premium increases. We've got some other things out there that you could have a package of ACA reforms, getting at trying to get at the fact that we've seen increases in farmer prices, increases in other things. And while every time we try to do it, the Republicans want to just repeal the whole ACA, maybe after this charming presidential election comes to a conclusion, that there will be some actual work that could be done to perfect and make changes to the ACA, which, by the way, any big bill you do that to, we just have been denied that opportunity, and I think it's time to do that. You also have the Cadillac tax, the medical device tax, some things that might bring in some Republican support as well in making some of those changes. Those have been suspended, but you could use that as well. So you could see a package of reforms or tax reform or any of these health care bills as a vehicle to get this done.
That's great. Just to follow up on that point, rising prescription drug costs is a big drive to rising premiums in general, but also has been a big driver of higher premiums in the exchanges. Mm-hmm. So do you think there's more opportunity to get insurers to focus on prescription drug costs as a challenge?
Yes, that is, to me, I've asked some of them that, and they were able to show they have this RX pricing group that they're part of that's been pushing this issue that has businesses and insurance companies, also employers, big companies, small companies. I hate this, right? And by the way, if you ever hear that figure which I used once, that drug prices are 10% of healthcare, it's not really true, because if you ask any hospital or some of these other people, that doesn't include that. That's just the retail number. Mm-hmm. And so the real number is somewhere like 17, 19%. Mm-hmm. In that range, and then it's a big part of what the increase has been as well. And so I think that insurance companies are part of coalitions. They push this issue some, and that's good, but I think having them come out in this debate about the premium increases and talk about the role that the increasing costs of pharmaceuticals have played is going to be really important.
I have a few questions from the audience. One person would like you to outline your bill in support of prescription drugs from Canada.
Sure. Okay. Well, first of all, one of the pushbacks we've got on this is that it can be unsafe. I'm just laughing because Canada is not exactly a place that you look at. But so we've made sure. Yes, we've made sure that it meets our same qualifications for approval, and that the drugs are safe, and that they can then come in, and that they are certified as having gone through some of the same safety measures, and that the FDA says are safe, and those kinds of things. And then it simply allows for those drugs to come in at their price, many of which are the same drugs that we sell here, and would allow them to come in at that price so that we can compete. What's really interesting about this, Neera, is that, yes, we have this bill, but if the Secretary of Health and Human Services wanted to, she could actually certify this kind of competition now. This could happen. She could direct the FDA to allow for this kind of competition administratively. And all of these things that we've seen executive orders on, I would say this one could be a big help to people. And that is what I would suggest happens. We wouldn't even really have to pass the bill if they decided they wanted to make the move, as they've done. By the way, they did some of this way back when Sebelius was HHS secretary. They did this with drug shortages before we passed the bill. So They could do this, and then they could allow, once they could certify individuals to bring this in. So I want to add that to our bill.
This touches on a topic you raised earlier, which is the coupons. Are copay coupons the answer? Doesn't the insurer still pay full cost and
That's what I was
transfer?
getting at, yeah. Yeah, these coupons are good for, they're like, first of all, I'm always someone that loses them and forgets to use them. I hate these kind of coupon things because I was always bad at them before and I'm bad at them now. And so it's just, not everyone is going to, it's an imperfect market. And to me, it seems to hurt people that might not be aware of them, or that the pharmacy isn't aware of them, or something like that. It's just, there's no way it's fair. There's just no way it's fair as a way to run a healthcare system. But you add to that is that the insurance companies are still paying this full price, and maybe the individual consumer gets it, but the insurance companies in the market are still paying the full price. And now let's get to Medicaid and all those, what are they? They have this rebate system. But if it's been misclassified, that coupon isn't going to fix that. And it's certainly not going to fix the fact that this misclassification in the case of EpiPen appears to have been going on since something like 2009, or we do not yet know how far back and how much money's at stake. All I know is that last year in Minnesota, they estimate one drug, $4 million for one state.
And then the last question is one that I think is important to end on, which is, I think a lot of people are just frustrated with what's holding this back, addressing this problem. It's obviously been in the headlines. A lot of consumer outrage. It's hard to see a consumer issue which has garnered so much attention over the last couple of years, and yet it seems really hard for anyone to do anything. What is who is to blame?
The people who are making the money off of it are holding it back. So when you look at those profit margins, and that is the American way, but the problem is that to me, the people in Congress are not representing the interests of their constituents if they're not willing to do something about this problem. I'm not saying it's simple, but boy, there are a lot of ideas out there that are bipartisan where you could actually move something. And that's why I'm to the point, after trying to do this for 10 years, hope that we will have more and more attention on what's really going on here outside of the one drug. And I will say one drug is one good way that captures people's imagination, and that's important. But we just can't let this go, and that's why it has to come up in debates to push people. I was looking at the Drugs from Canada bill. The last time we even got a vote on this was 2012, and we had 43 people in favor of it. This is McCain in my bill, and 54 people against it. So we weren't really close to the 60, and maybe that would change now with all the attention and what the astronomical increases that we've seen since that time. But I just think people are going to have to be held accountable for these price increases. I don't know any other way to do it. I think there's some people that have been valiantly trying to get this done, and I don't see, pharmaceutical companies as a bad thing. They're big employers in our country. We want them to continue to research and develop these life-saving drugs. But I think things are completely off balance and off kilter. And it's the American people who are suffering because of it. And it's just the ultimate version of what's unfair about politics. If you have all those people that are telling their true heartfelt stories about these drugs, and you have companies that are making 10 to 43% profit margins, and you have drugs that are going up just because they can, we have a severely imbalanced market. And the reason I love doing the antitrust subcommittee is that our job is to set even playing field rules. The playing field isn't even. It's going like this, and that's where the American people are at the bottom.
It's a great ending, and I also want to say it's a reason why it's critical that the American people have actual champions who are willing to take on the drug industry on this topic and represent consumers in their battles with pharma and pharmaceutical interests. So thank you so much for your comments and everything you're doing.
Thank you.